Hello everybody, I am so excited to be teaching you this semester in Calculus 2. I'm also excited to be making this video to tell you a little bit about what to expect this semester and what the class is going to be like. So this is of course an online class, so let's start by talking a little bit about what to expect in an online versus a face-to-face class. So the advantages of taking a class online, of course the two biggest ones are that we'll have video lectures. So you can then rewatch these video lectures as often as you need to, right? You don't have to try to copy every little thing from the board like you would in a face to face class, taking frantic notes, terrified that you're going to miss something, because you don't necessarily have to take a lot of notes at all. If you watch the video lectures, you can sort of rewind and fast forward and use the scrubber bar to go to exactly the part that you want. That's a huge deal because it means that what happens, in a face-to-face class where once the teacher says it, it's gone forever, doesn't apply in an online class because we have the video lectures that you can watch and rewatch all that you need to. Of course, also a huge advantage right now is you have less exposure to the global pandemic that's raging around us. On the other hand, face-to-face classes have a lot of advantages too. Again, the two most important ones by far is that you can just stop whenever you have questions, raise your hands and go, wait, back up here, I didn't get it. And that's a super important thing because if all you have to work with are the video lectures, then you have to email the teacher, which you can always email me and ask questions, but it may take several hours before I get a chance to respond to you. When you have a face-to-face class, of course, you're in the same physical place at the same time with your teacher, so you can get immediate help whenever you need it. You can just raise your hand and say, I didn't get it, explain it again. Also, having regular class meetings provides a lot of structure. Right? You get reminders every time you go to class of when things are due, when the tests are going to be. You also have this reminder to do the homework, right, and of what to keep up with, because you know that, oh, okay, today's the day I go to class, and so that reminds you of the stuff you're supposed to be doing. In a online class where there are no class meetings, right, it's much easier to get lost, right, and to lose yourself in the scheduling part of things. So our class, in a lot of ways, is going to be the best of all possible worlds. We're going to meet synchronously in this online class. That means that we will have regular Zoom class meetings. Right? So from 1 o'clock to 2:50 on Wednesday and Fridays. That's PM, by the way. Actually, I think it's about AM right now. As I'm recording this, I'm often working very late at night, especially with the kids because that's the time when they're in bed. But 1 p.m. to 2:50 p.m. Wednesdays and Fridays. We'll meet in Zoom, and that gives you all the advantages of a face-to-face class in that you can always stop me if you don't understand something and ask questions and get immediate help. It also gives you the structure of having class 2 days a week where you have to stop, think about calculus, remember what's due when, and keep everything straight. The homework will also be due on Wednesdays and Fridays. So again, we'll have that same structure and rhythm of when things are due and when class meets. Now, of course, maybe this is a bit of a downside, but we will require your active participation and attendance. So that's part of your grade. So we will collect the attendance information from Zoom and record that, and that will end up being part of your grade. So you really do have to come to the class meetings. Right? So what should you expect from the class meetings? I'll lecture typically 10 to 20 minutes, something like that, depending on the material, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. And you can stop me anytime. In fact, I strongly encourage you to do that. Just unmute your mic and go, hey, I didn't get it. Where did that two come from? or I'm lost, there's a minus sign, and I got no idea where it came from. So I really, really want you to stop me if you have questions. That's the whole point, right? You could watch the video lectures and see the show. The whole point of having class where we meet live together at the same time is to give you that advantage that you would get from a face to face class of being able to stop and ask questions. Right? And also, the fact that after I've lectured for a few minutes, I'll give you a problem or two to work, and we'll go to breakout rooms in Zoom where you'll work on those problems with one of our learning assistants. So these LAs are undergraduates, just like you, who have taken Calculus 2, and we have trained how to work with students and explain homework problems and the problems we're going to work on in class. So they'll already know the material, they'll be really good at it, and you'll work in a breakout room with one of our learning assistants. We'll try to set things up after the first few classes so that you have the same people in your breakout rooms every time so you can get to know each other in a smaller group, and the same learning assistant every time. That way you can get to know them too. So that works really, really well because I'll lecture for a little bit, teach part of the material, then you go to the breakout rooms and try one on your own. Right? A lot of times when we come back to the main room, I will roll my Dungeons and Dragons dice. I don't know if you can hear them rolling here in my hand. I'll roll my Dungeons and Dragons dice, randomly pick someone from the classroom, and ask them to explain the problem. This is one way you can earn extra homework points because if a person in one of the breakout rooms gets the question right or explains it correctly, everybody in that group gets the points. So it's to your advantage, right? Not just to figure out the problem yourself, but also to make sure everybody in your group understands the problem. And then we'll repeat. I'll lecture some more over some more material. Then we'll go back to the breakout rooms and work one, in the groups. We'll keep doing that throughout our whole 2 hour time together. So the goal is, right, if you actively participate this way, you ought to really understand the material by the end of class. And if you don't, you can always stop and say, hey, I don't really understand the material. And I will be more than happy to explain it to you until you do. Right? So again, this gets you sort of the best of all worlds, right? Like a face-to-face class, you can stop and ask questions whenever you need to. Like a face-to-face class, we have the structure of meeting, you know, consistently. You also have these learning assistants who will be there to help you and give you practice in class to make sure that you really understand everything. So I'm really excited about this format. We've done this before. It works really, really, really well. The grades are so much higher when we use this format than when we've done other things. Um, the downside of Calculus 2, of course, is that in general, Calculus 2 is a very difficult class. And so I want to sort of explain to you what to expect, on that front. I mean, I love teaching Calculus 2. I've been doing this a really long time, and Calculus 2 is by far my favorite undergraduate class to teach. But it's also by far the most difficult of the lower division math classes. For engineers, for example, Calculus 2 is usually the hardest class that engineers take from the math department. For math majors, this is the hardest class until you get to be, say, a junior or so, and you start taking the really hard upper level math classes. It's a hard class, but we put the structure in place, right, with the class meetings and with the learning assistants there to help, that I think will give you the chance to be successful. So what should you expect, out of this class as far as the material goes? Well, in our textbook, we'll cover chapter 6, which is applications of integrals. So these are word problems that we solve with integrals. Sort of like those problems that you did with, maximize the area enclosed by some fence or whatever, that you saw back in Calculus 1. Those all use derivatives. We'll have similar kinds of word problems that all use integrals. The point of this chapter isn't really to learn how to solve the individual kinds of problems. The point is to really understand what an integral is so that you can figure out how to use it in a new situation that you come across in other classes. Then we'll do chapter 7. So chapter 7 is all about evaluating integrals, notice, by hand. Right? So you won't be allowed a calculator on the exams, because the whole point is to be able to figure out how to evaluate these integrals by yourself. There's several really cool tricks that we'll learn how to do these integrals. Most of it involves a lot of algebra and trig to turn ugly, horrible, nasty integrals into integrals we can do with what we already learned in Calculus 1. Finally, we get to chapter 8. This is my favorite part, I think. This is about sequences and series. And so when you ask students who've had Calculus 2 before, what do they remember? They'll usually say something about washers and shells, which is one of the first things that we do in chapter 6. They may mention something about having to do all those silly integrals, but by far the most common answer is it's the sequences and series stuff. And that's really difficult material to understand, but I think with the support we have in place, having class, having the video lectures, having the learning assistants, I think we have a plan that if you work and you try really hard, that you can be very successful in the class. Finally, we will do a little bit of chapter 9, the first few sections. This is really material that goes with Calculus 3, but we introduce this in chapter 9 really in just one quick class meeting for two reasons. Number one, almost everybody has usually seen this material because they have taken physics and ran across this in physics. So it's really pretty easy at the end of the semester to throw in. It feels like a relief to do that after the difficulty of chapter 8. And also, that way, when you take Calculus 3, then the teachers can all assume that everybody has seen the very beginning material about what a vector is, instead of some people who've had physics having an advantage over everybody else, who hadn't yet. So I always like to give people this graph when I introduce the different chapters that we cover to sort of show you what the difficulty level is like. So chapter 6 is a pretty difficult chapter. In some ways, well, for very many people, it'll be the lowest score people make on their exams is the exam over chapter 6, because keeping all the various ideas straight is kind of tricky for chapter 6. On the other hand, I think chapter 7 is a little harder because you have all these different integral techniques and you have to figure out which one to use on a given problem. We'll spend a lot of time practicing, and so people often do pretty well on that exam, but it takes a lot of work. And then we get to chapter 8, the sequences and series stuff. And the difficulty level for it looks sort of like this. It's really hard material. And again, people will oftentimes do well on the exams, but the only way to do that is to do a lot of practice. It takes a huge amount of practice to get good at it. And so people tend to either do really well on the test over chapter 8 or really bad. Right? It's just a matter of putting in the time to practice. And then, of course, chapter 9 is sort of trivially easy compared to everything else. And it's there partly to give us a break at the end. All right, so what do you need to do to pass, right? Or to make a C at least, right? Well, I would suggest strongly that you should plan to spend at least 8 hours, maybe more, depending on what grade you want to make. Studying, watching the video lectures, doing the homework, right? Plus the time that we spend in class on top of that 8 hours, right? You should also plan to come to every class, right? Log in, ask me whenever there's something you don't understand. So if you're just sitting there thinking, I have no idea what he's doing, then stop me. That's the whole point. I'm not here to talk just to my screen. I want to talk to you. I want you to tell me when you don't understand something. I'll explain it again and we'll get it figured out for you. When we go to the breakout rooms, work really hard to work the problems with the other members of your group. Make sure all of you understand. That, again, gets you extra homework points if people answer questions correctly. But more than that, it helps you learn the material. Make sure you do all the homework, both the Webwork homework and the part that we'll upload to Blackboard. I'll explain in a few minutes all the different kinds of the homework. But the homework is, of course, an important part of the grade, and if you don't do it, then you don't get the points from that part of the grade. But even more importantly, it's where we really get that practice that you need in order to do well on the tests. Okay? So when you're doing the homework, make sure that you understand, the why behind each problem. In other words, What is it that I'm trying to accomplish in this question? Why did I do it this way? Why didn't I do it some other way? Is there a different way I could have done it? And sometimes the answer for that is yes, especially in chapter 8. And understanding that there was maybe 5 different ways I could have solved that problem is part of figuring out the problem. Make sure when we're working through chapter 7 that you don't cheat yourself out of the practice that you're going to need by trying to use your calculator or the internet to do those integrals. So I know for the homework, you could take the integrals, plug them into someplace on the web or on your calculator, and it will give you the answer. You could plug that answer into our online homework system and get credit for it without having to know anything about calculus. But if you do that, then you'll fail the test and it'll be unpleasant, right? So what you want to do is use the homework to practice getting better at the skills you're going to have on the exam. Especially also for chapter 7, I'll have a list of derivative rules, integral rules, and trig rules that you'll have to know in order to be able to do those problems in chapter 7. Now, the good news is we don't really need those until chapter 7, so that gives you, a month or so to learn them all, to practice, especially the trig, because people's trig tends to be rusty. The bad news is though, if you don't know those rules, then you can't possibly do the work in chapter 7. So you have some time to get started, making sure you memorize those, and just make sure we do. Now, one of the things I always try to explain to students when we start the beginning of the class is you really can only learn this stuff by doing it actively. What I mean is actually doing problems. So that's why I'm not going to have our virtual class and just talk for 2 hours. I mean, I do love hearing myself talk. Okay, I'm a professor. That comes with the territory. But I'm not going to just lecture for 2 hours because A, that would be really boring, and B, it wouldn't be any different than the video lectures that you can already watch, in Blackboard. So what you want to do is do problems, right? That's why I will lecture for a few minutes and kind of show you how the stuff works. Then we'll break into groups and let you actually do some of the problems. Okay? The same thing goes with doing the homework. Until you actually get in there with the homework problems and practice it, right? You can't really get good at it. Along the same lines, you need to work deeply. So here's what I mean by that. You have to think carefully about what you did and why you did it, right? So we're working some problem and there's a minus sign that shows up in there, and make sure you understand where that minus sign came from. Why did I divide by 2 right there? Is there some reason that we worked the problem this way, or could I have done it a different way? Would that have worked too? If not, why? Those are all questions you have to ask yourself, because that's part of really understanding the material. So one of the critical things to understand about Calculus 2 and the exams that we're going to have in here is the point of the exam questions is never to just get the answer. Now, that's different maybe than you were used to in high school or maybe in Calculus 1, where, maybe you had multiple choice exams. Of course, our exams won't be. There'll be a question and some blank space for you to write your work. The good news is there'll be partial credit available with that, the way we're doing it. But it also means that I'm going to be grading what you show me you understand. In other words, I'm not after the answer and the answer only. I'm after you to convince me that you know what you're doing. Let me say that one more time to make sure that sinks in, because that's a strange concept. The point of the test questions and the homework questions is not to just, quote, get the right answer. The point is for you to convince me you know what you're doing. So lots of the questions will ask you to explain what you're doing and why. There'll be questions, especially in chapter 8, where you have to tell me how you're working the problem, and what conclusion you can draw from what you did. So that's part of why Calculus 2 is difficult, but also part of why Calculus 2 is so awesome, because you really have to learn to think in Calculus 2. Um, One of the things that you may not care much about, but I have to, because I deal with this sort of bureaucratic end of the university. Calculus 2 is part of the university core curriculum, but it's not a part of the core curriculum under EQS, which means empirical and qualitative reasoning skills, like Calculus 1 is, or college algebra, or some of the others. In other words, it's not a getting the answer kind of class. It actually gets assessed as a critical thinking class, which is a different rubric and a different set of goals. So part of the goal here is to teach you to think deeply about what's going on. And of course, finally, you have to work repeatedly. In other words, you have to do a whole bunch of problems and you have to do a whole bunch of problems. Right? So that means working all the homework and then going back and working them again before the test to make sure that you have enough practice. Right? So I like to analogize working the Calculus 2 homework as making free throws. So here's what I mean. Suppose you want to go practice making free throws. Right? Well, you don't just take the basketball and just sling it at the goal 50 times and say, oh, I've thrown the ball around. That must make me better. And that's practice, right? So what do you do when you're practicing making free throws, right? You hold the ball just so. You notice how you're holding the ball, right? You notice how you're standing. You notice how your weight is adjusted on your feet. Then you try to shoot the ball and see, did it go in the hoop? If it did, that's great, and you try to do that again. If it didn't, then you think about, how can I adjust how I'm holding the ball, how I'm standing, how I push the ball toward the goal. So you have to notice what you're doing and make adjustments based on what you see. And that's exactly what you should be doing with the homework. So in the Webwork homework that's online, you'll get to take a guess at the question, and the computer will tell you whether you got it right or not. And so that's awesome, because that's just like watching to see whether your ball went in the hoop when you're making a free throw. You can then adjust what you did and keep working at it until you get it right. So throughout all of this, right, the process is to constantly think about what's working, what isn't, right, and why that is. Okay. So, the ultimate responsibility for doing all the work, especially all the practice that you're going to need to do to learn this material, is really your responsibility. But I'm always here to help. This is why we're doing the class with online meetings in Zoom, so that I will be here and can help whenever you have questions as we go through the lecture. You can always go back and watch the video lectures later, but by having the Zoom lectures, right, then you can stop me and ask for help. You can always email me, or we can set up a Zoom visit to talk whenever you have questions. My email, of course, is brock.williams@ttu.edu. Send me an email anytime you have questions about anything. Sometimes, even toward the end of the semester, I'll get emails and they'll start something like this: I am so sorry to bother you, but, or I really, really hate to bother you, but, and I understand why students might start an email that way, because they may have had a teacher in the past that acted annoyed when students asked them questions. Or maybe in high school you had a teacher that, didn't want you to come into their classroom until, class time started, and they didn't seem to want to be around the students. But that is not the way this is going to work. Okay, I'm here for you to ask questions. Don't ever stop and think, oh, I'm so sorry to annoy you. No. See, when I get annoyed, it's because students fail a test and didn't ask for help. Right? Asking for help is fine. That's what I'm here for. Okay, so quickly, I want to go through sort of the gory details of how the grading and this sort of thing is going to work. So, have standard 10-point grading scale, meaning 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 90 is a B, and so forth. We'll have 3 tests: one over Chapter 6, one over Chapter 7, and Section 8.1. The reason is because 8.1 is sequences, and separating sequences from the rest of Chapter 8, which will be the third exam, over series, gets those two different words that sound similar and they both start with S on 2 different exams, so that you get the idea of sequences nailed down in your head before we start the idea of series. Chapter 9 will only be covered on the final exam, which will be comprehensive, meaning it'll have questions on it from the entire semester. It'll be a departmental exam, so everybody will be taking the same test at the same time. And we'll take our tests, at our normal class time, online using Proctorio to proctor everything. You won't be allowed to use calculators on the exams, like any Calculus 2 class. That's a departmental rule. So again, don't use them on your homework and get used to having them there. Except that when you get into chapter 6, you'll notice some of those questions have some pretty ugly arithmetic. The arithmetic on the exam will be nice, right? I'll give you nice numbers that work out nicely because I'm not testing your ability to multiply ugly numbers with decimals. So if you need to do arithmetic, especially in chapter 6, that's fine. But if you get used to using a calculator or a website to do the integrals for you in chapter 7, then you'll be in trouble when you have to do the integrals without all of that on the exam. We'll have two different kinds of homework. We'll have web work, and those of you who have had Calculus 1 here at Tech will be familiar with Webwork. Right? It's an online system. You'll log in, you'll have lots of questions to answer, and you can type in an answer as many times as you want to until the due date, and it will tell you whether your answer is correct or not. That's really cool because you get this immediate feedback. The downside is you have to get it right, or otherwise it keeps saying your answer is not right. And it says not in all caps. It gets a little discouraging after a while, but it does give you a chance to keep practicing over and over and over until you get it right. We'll also have homework that you'll scan and upload to Blackboard, and our grader will grade that. Um, the advantage to that is those are the kind of questions that will, in the same format that you'll see on an exam. In other words, it'll say do this problem, and there'll be a big blank space for you to do the problem. Right? Um, that lets us check to see if your thought process, right, is correct. If you're writing down all the steps that you need that you have to write down on the exam. Right? Some of those homework questions that you'll be scanning and uploading to Blackboard will be some of the same questions that you'll be working on during class with your groups. So it's yet another reason for coming to class because some of the questions that you'll do, not all of them of course, but some of them will be the same homework questions that you have to then turn in Blackboard. We won't take any homework late, but I will drop 30 points worth of homework when I calculate your average. So let me explain what I mean. The WebWork points add up to 333 possible points you could earn from WebWork. The the homework that you upload into Blackboard is worth another, I believe, 697 points. Altogether, that comes out to 1,030 possible points between the homework you upload and the homework that's in WebWork. Notice that the homework you upload counts about 2/3 of that total, and the WebWork is only about a third. So the homework you upload, it counts a lot more than the WebWork does. But altogether, it's possible to make about 1,030 points. When I calculate your homework average, I'll drop those 30 points. In other words, I'll take all the points that you make and divide by 1,000, which means you could miss 30 points along the way and still make 100 on your homework average. Or even better, if you get all the possible points you could get, your homework average could be 103, which is great. You could even be higher than that because there will be times when we will, during class, allow you to earn an extra homework point. That means that, one of the points that gets added into that 1,030 possible points you could get. And those will just be free on top of that, which means your homework average could be maybe 104 or 105 if you take advantage of every possible opportunity to earn some points. Okay. Well, also, because it's so important that you actually come to class and work with the learning assistants and be there for the lecture, we're going to incentivize your attendance by adjusting your final average based on how often you come to class. So the idea is you're allowed 3 free absences. If you get sick, if you have a problem, whatever it is, there's no excusing. You don't have to try to give me an excuse or explain. It doesn't really It doesn't really count one way or the other if it's excused or not. The idea, unless it's a university official excuse, based on tech OPs, you get 3 free absences however you need to use them, because sometimes things just come up. Right? After those 3, though, you start losing half a point from your final average for every absence past that. Okay? Um, the cool thing is that works in reverse, so that if you don't need to miss your 3 free absences, then you could get those half points added back as bonus. In other words, if you don't make any absences, then your final average gets an extra point and a half added to it. It's really great. Right? This is why we won't have any bonus or reopening the homework or test corrections or extra credit or any of those sorts of things, because this is your opportunity to earn extra points, and it's just by coming to class. So if you come to class, then that's your chance to earn sort of these extra points, and there's no extra credit or bonus or whatever, at the end of the semester. Now, I will say this: if you have a significant problem, sometimes students don't know this, and so it's worth me stopping to say, if you have a serious problem, a health problem, or just a serious life happens, I'm in deep trouble problem, okay, then let me know. And also, email the dean of students office, call the dean of students office, and talk to the people there. They can authorize deviations from the official rules in the syllabus. They can authorize changes to what the rules normally would be if you have a serious significant problem. So if you have a health emergency or something like that, especially, they are the ones that can provide authorization to change what would be the otherwise applicable rules. Okay, what else do you need to know? Well, in our Zoom meetings, you can log into Zoom with your computer, but also with a tablet like an iPad or a phone. There's phone apps for Android or for iPhone that you can use to log into Zoom. I don't recommend the phone because it's kind of hard to see the screen, but it would work if you're, traveling or you're out and you have no other way to log in. The phone will work fine, or at least well enough, and you can log in and join in on the class. But for the exams, you will have to have an actual computer. An iPad or a phone won't work. And the reason is you have to have the full version, computer version of Chrome to make. So a Chromebook should work, but an iPad has an app that's called Chrome, but it's not really Chrome. It's really dressed up Safari. So it has to be an honest to goodness computer with a webcam and a microphone to take the exams. You'll also need a way to scan your work and upload it, especially the homework. When you work through the material in Blackboard, I have a list of some suggested apps you can use. But for most people, you don't need a special scanner. You can just use an app on your smartphone, and it works very easily. A printer would be nice, but it's not necessary. So don't go buy a printer just for this class. But for the exams, you can either print them if you do have a printer and then work them on the printout, or you can just read it on the screen and work it on your own blank paper and then scan that. Also, right, what should you do next? Well, first, log into ttu.blackboard.com. That is our course homepage. You'll see that link there to Calculus 2, and click on the link that says Start Here. It's not terribly imaginatively named, but that tells you exactly where you should start. There's several steps there. Step 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, that's very likely how you actually got to this video. So you probably are in the process of doing that as you listen to this video. But going through all those various steps on the Start Here page will help you get your computer set up, will help you figure out how to use the app that you're going to eventually use to upload your homework and to scan things, and get everything all ready to go. Then in Blackboard, click on the Assignments link, and you'll see there the schedule and all the assignments for the whole class. Go to assignment 1 and you can start watching the video lectures and start learning. I would encourage you, if you possibly can, to watch the video lectures before our class time. That way, if there's something you don't understand, then watching me explain it live, will probably clear up what you didn't understand. Or at the very least, you can still stop me and say, I watched the video lecture and I've listened to you and I don't get it. Explain it to me so I can understand it. And I will. We'll keep going until you figure it out. That's actually by far the most efficient way to learn the material. Is to watch the video lectures first so you have a rough idea what's going on, then come to class, and by the time you finish class you should know what's going on. Then you just have to spend some time practicing it. Finally, whenever you have any questions about anything at all, email me. Never ever feel like, oh, I don't want to annoy him. Should I email him? Yes, you should email him. You should email me, ask me questions. If you have more questions than I can answer in a quick email, we can set up a time to meet on Zoom and talk through things. Because the point is, I'm here to help. Right? So don't feel bad about asking for help. That's what I'm here for.